The topic that really has nothing to do with anything, but it seemed like a really good idea at the time, is pennies from heaven. I thought that sort of fit somehow, and we'll see. So to catch you up, if you're with us for the first time in our journey of the heart, we've talked about that your soul hovering above the earth, looking for a place to come in, to give your gift or gifts to the world, did not come here to struggle. I've never met anybody that said, when I said, what do you think you're here for? What is the purpose of your life? Nobody has ever said to struggle and get by. Have you ever felt that that was true for you? That I came here just to pay my rent and barely eke out a living? No, absolutely not. You know why we want to have some mastery over our finances in life is so we can do the bigger stuff that we came here to do. Sure, there are other places in the world where money is pretty insignificant with regards to the spiritual journey, but we live in Los Angeles in 2014. So like I say, there may be other worlds without money, but this is not one of them. So it becomes something that it's important for us to have some level of mastery over so we can do the bigger stuff that we came here to do. Because until we have mastery over it, it seems that money takes an enormous amount of people's time and attention, doesn't it? When you're worried about it all the time, and people have it backwards. They say, oh, people with money, all they think about is money. I have not found that to be true. I think it's people without money who are thinking about money all the time and how they're going to get some. You know, what we teach in the Science of Mind is that God is a principle that's everywhere present, and that principle has qualities, attributes like love and wisdom and beauty, and also abundance. So if God is everywhere equally present, and I believe that God is, then that means that abundance is actually everywhere equally present, and we would say, well, then why don't I see it? Well, because our job on the spiritual journey becomes to cultivate an inner eyesight, an eye divine, you know, so that we begin to build a consciousness. We start to have an awareness that there is always abundance everywhere, that there is always more than enough, that there is an ever availability of good, that wherever we are, we know, I mean deeply, deeply know that wherever we are, our needs will in fact be met. So the good of God never runs out. The universe completely supports each and every one of us if you believe that, if you're willing to believe that, and you know it says it's done unto you as you believe. So my encouragement to all of us today is to decide that the universe supports me. The universe is on my side. It's a friendly universe in which I live. You know, because so often what we'll do is that we find ourselves experience what everyone else believes. We find ourselves experiencing struggle and lack and limitation because we do not take charge of our own thinking, because we don't take charge of our own believing. We don't take charge of our own consciousness, our own mental household. It's like we become zombie thinkers. You know, zombies are extraordinarily popular right now. That people will look back years from now and say, 2014 was the zombie renaissance on Earth. There is, you know, all you need to have a hit TV show is to have some zombies in there, and you've made it. You've made it. So, but I think we become like zombie thinkers, thinking the dead thoughts of the past, thinking that didn't really work for us, but we haven't got anything better as yet, so we're just going to keep thinking what we thought before, only harder. But it didn't work for us originally anyway, so why do we think it's going to work for us now? You know, Mary Baker Eddy was the founder of Christian Science, and she said that we have to stand porter at the gate of our mind. So that means that we have to say, all right, what thoughts, what ideas, what beliefs, what practices will I let in, and which will I keep out? What thinking of the world will I say yes to, and what thinking will I say, no, I don't accept that. I know a greater truth. I believe something of a higher order. See, every single man, woman, and child is a unique creation of the divine consciousness, that you are an individualization of the one life, the one mind that is God. And so infinite spirit, we say, is always seeking a fuller and greater expression of itself by means of us. God gets to express and experience and be more by means of us saying yes to life. So why would we not take charge of our thinking? Why would we keep settling for having a limited existence? I think, we have to have a spiritual practice to not be at the effect of the thinking of the world around us. Right? Because otherwise, then your mind is just wide open. If you don't have a spiritual practice where you come back and touch the hem of the garment on a daily basis, where you're praying and meditating and studying and speaking the words of truth, that's what makes your mind strong. That's what expands your consciousness. And without that, you will find that you're experiencing what pretty much everybody else is experiencing, that you're kind of doing what I think of as statistical living. That you'll be subject to what everybody else is subject to. The world will always broadcast lack and limitation and struggle and not enough. And tell us that, you should just be satisfied where you are, and this is probably as good as it gets, and it's all downhill from here, so just prepare yourself. And that probably goes back as far as when we were cave people, struggling for survival on a daily basis. Now we have evolved as a species, which I think is really good news. We have evolved spiritually, but we know people, nobody here, but people we know, that now have just a better cave, right? They have a better cave because their cave has wall-to-wall carpeting in it, but they're still struggling on a daily basis. So remember, your struggle, your being in lack does not glorify God. You don't get a special place in heaven because you really struggled hard on earth. That all of my grandparents were born in what they used to say was the old country. We came from the old country. They all came from the old country because there was the promise, the idea of a better life, of more opportunity. There was the carrot of I could have a more abundant existence in America than I could have in the old country. Now, I would say that they all moved up a rung or two on the economic ladder from what they had experienced in the old country. So coming here was definitely good for them. They were really hardworking, good people. And although they always worked hard, they remained part of the working class poor. They brought a belief with them in lack and struggle and not enough. They brought that belief with them across the ocean from the old country. And oh, by the way, that was largely what they experienced. And the people they hung out with, all of the other people from the old country, also brought that belief. So there was enormous agreement for struggle. There was enormous agreement for how hard it is. And although it's better than we had in the old country, it's still lack and limitation and struggle. Now, my parents, a generation later, they did a little bit better. That consciousness continues to evolve. And for all of us, we are supposed to do better than the generations before us. All right? But the thinking of the world always had a hold of my parents to some extent. And so I don't want to minimize that there was a sufficient amount of light in their souls to show them something better than what my grandparents had all had. I mean, after all, my grandmother came from Italy when she was 15 years old for an arranged marriage. 15. Her brothers put her on a boat. I think the story is that they got $20 and sold her off, okay, for an arranged marriage to a man who was more than 20 years her elder. But that's what you did back then, and it was better than staying where they were. It was better. Can you imagine that was actually a greater good? That was a greater good. Right? So comparatively, I think my parents led a more abundant life than my grandparents, yet the limited thinking of the world always had its way with them. And so this is why Ernest Holmes says you have to become a Buddha before a Christ. Right? That you have to know what you're thinking to see what's outpicturing in your life. Because what's outpicturing in your life is directly related to what you're believing and thinking and saying and doing. And so then we move up that spiral. Until we've mastered that, we have no hope of being the place where the light of Christ expresses in the world. Right? So I feel very blessed. All of my ancestors had a really good work ethic that they passed on. And so for me personally, what I see is that God used absolutely everything necessary to get me to see that there was a greater good available for me. See, because If I stayed where I was, back on the East Coast, I would have remained in the collective consciousness, the collective thinking of my family. And I can see that I would have had an experience that was very similar to my tribe that I grew up with, right? But for me to not be subject to that, that would necessitate my moving out from under sort of the umbrella of generations of limited family thinking. Does this make sense? Yeah. Right? So the message was clear: go west, young man. Right? So I graduated from college and I moved to Los Angeles, and I'm working a lot. And early on, I'm paying my bills, but I'm struggling. But it's what I knew to do because that's what I had been taught. You work a lot, and life is a struggle. Life is a struggle. Now, one of our teachers, Emma Curtis Hopkins, she said this: there is good for me, and I ought to have it. Don't you agree? That if there is good for you, that good has been ordained for you by God. And shouldn't you have what God is trying to give you? I mean, God has already put your name on it. Right? So yes, absolutely. I should tell you, I was living in an apartment with pretty much no furniture. I had taken my college apartment consciousness and transferred it across the coast. And now this is all in the days before the wonder of IKEA. And so, if you could picture some, big pillows on the floor and milk crates pretty much holding everything I owned, and the mattress on the floor, not exactly the good life. And so I want to tell you what was a defining moment for me that gave me an idea of something better in a very personal way. Some friends invited me to a party Friday or Saturday night at their really beautiful condo. And I walked in, and the place was absolutely elegant. And two things really struck me from this experience. Now, I admit, I had to be ripe. I was ripe and ready for the picking here. They had just bought a beautiful, brand new sofa, and it was delivered in time for the party. It had been delivered that afternoon. It was this dark, dark green velvet, as I remember. Now, we're going back 35 years. But I remember this sofa. And they had also just returned from a 2-week vacation in Hawaii. Now, honestly, I don't remember much else about the party because between the sofa and Hawaii, I was spinning. I was. I remember thinking, I don't even have a sofa. So here's one of those things, how we become our parents. My father always carried a little notepad in his shirt pocket here, forever. It always had baseball statistics in it and, measurements of doorways and how the size of screens that we needed for different parts of the house and settings of things and a couple of phone numbers. But he always had this. I have become that person. I admit, I have become that person. So at this party, I remember thinking, I don't even have a sofa. Note to self. Goal number 1, get a sofa. Yeah, I got to stop eating dinner on the floor. I'm going to get me a sofa. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. And Hawaii, well, I might as well say I wanted to go to the moon because they were equally as distant in my mind. Note to self. Goal number 2, go to Hawaii. So this was an important moment because I saw a greater good. These guys were the same age as I was. And here they had this, what looked to me like a really extraordinary existence. There is good for me, and I ought to have it. So, when we see other people doing well, the appropriate response is not, well, why them? What makes them so special? I don't think they're so great. All that. The appropriate response is, wow, good for them, that's for me. Good for them, that's for me. When we realize the truth in that, right? Good for them, that's for me. The light in our soul increases, and we start moving on our own hero's journey toward a greater good. So you might say, well, that's not a big deal. But you know, so yes, I grew up, we had a sofa in our house growing up. But I didn't have one all the years I was in college, which was a long time, you know? And we were not really vacation people, I got to tell you. Vacation was a time to do bigger chores, my father had figured out, you know? Gee, Dad, you're having a week off in August. What are we going to do? We're going to paint the house, son. And by we, he was talking about the royal collective we, as in you're going to paint the house. You know, gee, Dad, what are we going to do this summer? We, as in you, son, are going to seal the driveway. You're going to roof the house. You're going to plant some trees. You're going to clean out the basement. It went on and on. If we did go on vacation, I just want you to understand where my thinking came from. If we did go on vacation, it was mostly like a day trip to the beach with a picnic basket full of peanut butter and marshmallow sandwiches and lemonade. You know, resulted in horrific sunburns and a lot of yelling and screaming because somebody in the group just didn't believe that we deserved to be on vacation. Yes. So we have to rise out of that old thinking. You know, whether it's the thinking of our family or generations past or the thinking of the world around us. You know, that we have to rise out of that thinking. There is no lack in God. Right? There is enough of every good thing if we allow our thinking to expand enough to hold that truth. What would it take for you today to allow your thinking to expand enough to hold a greater truth for yourself, which then would translate into a greater truth for the world? See, you being in lack does not serve the world. In fact, you can do more good for the world when you're abundant. You know, this is how things happen. Because people have some mastery over money, they are able to do a lot of good things in the world. Sure, you can do good in the world without money, but you can do bigger good with money. You absolutely can. You can make a difference in a lot of people's lives if you have money. You know, the human personality and our family history and the world around us always says there is not enough. But if we don't examine that, it will run our lives. So I don't know where, but I suspect that probably somewhere in your life you heard there is not enough. From people you loved, from people you respected, from people you cared about. They were probably well-intentioned. They didn't want you to be disappointed or hurt. And they convinced you that there was not enough. But you know what? If we don't examine that, it will continue to run our lives decades later. It will affect the actions we take. It will affect the choices that we make. Now, it may be your experience thus far that there has not been enough. But you know, when you hear somebody say that, well, you know, it's really difficult to, you know, it's really hard to make a living, you know, life in Los Angeles is really tough. You can say, well, that may be your experience, but I do not accept that for me. You just have to say that silently on the inside so you don't take on whatever it is they're working out. Whatever their journey is doesn't mean it has to be your journey. You know, we are not separate from our good because we are not separate from God. It's already ours. And so to open the door, this necessarily means that we have to do some practices, right? Doing spiritual practice is what opens the door. So we're going to pray and we're going to meditate and we're going to study words of truth and sacred scriptures from different traditions. We're going to visualize. We're going to have goals. We're going to see a greater good. All of these things are part of what happens. You know, I was working at this job, and somebody gave me a book. I was right out of college, and somebody gave me Shakti Gawain's Creative Visualizations. Now, this is like back in 1982. Okay, so this is ancient history. And I got this book, and I was like, oh my God, do people know about this? This is incredible. And so I'm living at this house on the beach. Now, I'll tell you, doesn't that sound wonderful? I'm living in a house on the beach. The truth be told, where my consciousness was, this house should have been condemned. You know? But I was young, and when you're young, you can sort of bend with a lot. You know? You can really work with a lot when you were young. So what? There were walls that were missing. We were on the beach. Who needs walls anyway? You know, and garbage disposal, didn't matter that it didn't work. The electricity, the plumbing, it was all a suggestion, you know? We were on the beach, 4 of us living in this house that should have been condemned. And I'd get my coffee in the morning, and I'd go out onto the deck, and I'd look at the ocean, and I'd read creative visualization, and I would visualize a greater life. Now, I was living in a house where some of the walls were missing, but I just knew that there was something greater intended for me. Now, the universe could not give me that something greater if I couldn't believe it, if I couldn't accept it, if I wasn't willing for that to take place. So the spiritual practice was the way my thinking got expanded. I know people have a lot of charge on money, don't they? It's just a representation of energy. And the thing with energy is that energy's always got to move. It's always got to change form. It's got to change hands. So, one of my favorite stories was the Saint-Exupéry's The Little Prince. Have you read The Little Prince? It's a beautiful story. If you haven't read it to your kids or your grandkids, it's an absolute must. But The Little Prince says this. He says, "Here is my secret. It's very simple. It's only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye." What is essential is invisible to the eye. So I would say that with a consciousness of the divine presence, God is right where we are. The abundance of God is right where I am. We can see and we can experience something that's greater than our 5 senses tell us. Because every good thing in our life, I believe, comes out of an awareness of our oneness with God. Every good thing comes out of an awareness of our connection with something greater. So I have a little practice for us, and I'll explain the practice before we do it. So this involves a couple things. What your body does, your soul remembers. That's the world according to me. That's not The Little Prince, okay? What your body does, your soul remembers. So do the opposite of what I do. Take your hand to the left, right? So that's, you're all going that way, right? No, some of you are going the same way I'm going. Go the other way. Your other left. Yeah, your other left. That's it. Good. I release my belief in lack. So like in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, the left tends to be the past. So you do, I release my belief in lack. I release my need to struggle. I am grateful God is the abundance that I am. You got it? All right, 3 times. I release my belief in lack. I release my need to struggle. I am grateful God is the abundance that I am. I release my belief in lack. I release my need to struggle. I am grateful God is the abundance that I am. One more. I release my belief in lack. I release my need to struggle. I am grateful God is the abundance that I am. And so you may say, well, this is not quite it for me. Then change it up. If struggle is not your go-to behavior, so here's how I see this works, is that I'll be confronted with lack. To not feel that, I have a behavior. There's something that I do to not feel lack. So you might try to control, or you might hoard, or you might hide and go unconscious, or you might overshop to not feel the lack, right? So you release your belief in lack, and you release your need to do whatever that is that you do. Does this make sense? To cover up. I am grateful God is the abundance that I am. I think that about covers it.